The evening of March 20, 1989, in the quiet Swedish town of Hörby seemed completely ordinary. A light spring rain was drizzling, and twilight was quickly settling over the sleepy streets. 10-year-old Helen Nilsson pulled on her jacket, said goodbye to her mother, and ran out of the house. It was only a 10-minute walk along a well-known route to the place where her friends were waiting for her. But she never arrived. The town froze in horror. 6 days later, a terrifying realization was confirmed by a passerby who noticed a strange plastic bag by a forest road. What the police discovered inside made even seasoned detectives shudder. Little Helen was dead, and the marks on her body screamed that she had spent the last days of her life held captive by a true monster. The police did not yet know that it would take 15 long years to find the criminal, and that the key to solving the case would be one detective's obsession and technologies of the future that no one could have even dreamed of in '89. Helen Nilsson was born on June 18, 1978, in a town called Hörby. It is a small settlement in Sweden. The girl grew up in an atmosphere of love and care in a large family. She had a sister, Kristen, with whom she had a close relationship. Sweden is still considered one of the safest countries today. And in the 80s, when Helen was growing up and taking her first steps in this world, the country was even safer. The crime situation was truly calm. Usually, everything was limited to non-violent crimes, but fate had prepared something chilling for the Nilsson family. In the close-knit community of Hörby, everyone knew the hard-working Nilsson parents and their daughter well. Mothers and fathers here did not neglect their children and watched over them, but everyone was so used to peace and safety that supervision was rather lax. In this ideal atmosphere, Helen grew up and went to school, where she quickly made a circle of friends. So the 10-year-old girl began to spend her free time not only studying and interacting with family, but also with friends. She had no problems with school, so her parents treated their child leniently and let her go out for walks alone every day. The girl could leave at 7 p.m., walk around town with her friends, and return, all without supervision. Such behavior was a common occurrence for all local residents. People did not know what crime was and did not worry that it could be dangerous here. Helen planned to spend her evening on March 20, 1989, in exactly the same way. It was the year. It was Easter week. School children had no classes, so the girl decided to go for a walk with her friends. When her parents returned from work, Helen asked her mother for permission to walk to the local supermarket, which was no more than a kilometer from home. It was assumed that she would meet up with her friends 2 blocks away. The girls would chat, take a walk, and then go home. A little less than an hour had passed when there was a knock at the Nilsson family home. The mother assumed Helen had already returned from her walk, but instead of her daughter, she encountered 2 of her friends. The girls stated that Helen never arrived at their meeting point, so they hoped to find her at home. All this time, the woman expected her daughter home soon, but upon learning she had vanished without a trace, she decided to start searching immediately. At first, the mother walked around several blocks near the supermarket with her daughter's friends, but they failed to find any leads or Helen herself. It began to get dark, so the woman went to the police station to report her daughter as missing. The worried mother provided a detailed description of the girl and a photograph. They took the report seriously, as a minor had gone missing. This had never happened in the town before, so a search operation began immediately. By the evening of March 20, dozens of volunteers, police officers, and firefighters joined the rescue operation. Nevertheless, no one managed to discover anything new. Soon, the work was suspended until dawn, until it was light enough to conduct a full search and speak with potential witnesses. The search for the missing child continued the following day, but those efforts also yielded no results. Only on March 26 did a local resident discover something horrific. She was walking with her daughter in a wooded area on the outskirts of town, picking flowers. At first, the passers-by noticed an abandoned bag but didn't think much of it. Everything seemed strange only after they noticed the child's jacket just a couple of meters from the item. After carefully examining the area, the woman noticed something even more disturbing and contacted law enforcement. Upon arriving at the scene, the police found the girl's body in a bag. They identified her as Helen Nilsson. The girl had obvious head injuries appearing to be the result of a beating with bare hands. The bruises were in various stages of healing, but they were not the cause of death. The body had been dumped in a desolate area and hidden, but poorly. Most of her clothing was scattered around. Her own sweater was wrapped around the girl's neck, covering her face. The autopsy showed that the sweater likely caused her death, as it was used for strangulation. The medical examiner managed to find traces of rape on the body. He also found marks on her arms and legs from being immobilized. Given that Helen disappeared 6 days before her body was found in the forest, it should have been in poor condition due to decomposition. However, this was not the case. In the medical examiner's opinion, this was because she had remained alive for most of the week and died the morning before she was found. Characteristic marks on the victim's limbs suggested that Helen had been held captive all those days. Furthermore, the child was not fed and signs of dehydration were identified. All of this pointed to abduction, abuse, and torture that the school endured before she died. Detectives were busy investigating the murder. An enterprising young man who had just started working at the town's police station was assigned to the case. His only drawback was his lack of experience. Before this case, he had never dealt with violent crimes. Investigators from the capital were sent to Horby to assist the young specialist. Disagreements between them arose immediately. The young detective complained that these colleagues did not take him seriously because he worked in the provinces. All these internal conflicts only hindered progress in the search, reducing its effectiveness. The investigation continued, but there was no news from the police. Local residents began to experience intense fear for themselves and their children. Attempts to pressure the police began, but it didn't help much. People started to fear letting their children go out into the street. Women were afraid to leave their homes alone after dark. Everyone worried that a child killer capable of brutal crimes was roaming the town. And this case would not be the last if the police were too slow. Traces of seminal fluid collected from Helen's body were sent for laboratory analysis, but the capabilities of the 80s were too limited, so the tests did not yield any valuable information. The microscopic samples were sent to storage in the hope that forensic technology would improve later, so that they could be identified. The investigation followed a classic procedure. Detectives actively spoke with local residents, particularly those living near the supermarket, and also spoke a lot with the victim's friends. They were looking for witnesses who might have noticed something. Several people reported seeing Helen in the company of an unknown young man. However, his description varied. No one got close enough to him to tell more. In total, more than 1,000 people were interviewed, which allowed for a list of suspicious individuals to be compiled for more precise checks. At the initial stage of the investigation, registered sex offenders were considered. Tension in the town reached its peak as information began to leak to the public and was supplemented by chilling rumors. However, some of them were not without foundation. Everyone noticed that in the area where Helene lived, there were several people who had previously been involved in suspicious incidents or had even been convicted of sex crimes. For the most part, they had moved there after serving their sentences to start a new life. But the public was troubled that the names of potentially dangerous individuals were not made public, and even more. Some on this list worked with children in schools and clubs. All of this caused great public concern. The girl's body remained in forensic custody for a long time, so her loved ones could not pay their respects. However, the outcry only grew, so concerned locals gathered in the central square and held a demonstration against violence. People supported Helen's family and demanded justice. Meanwhile, the detectives did not sit idle, as they had to analyze and organize a huge amount of information. It seemed that checking the suspects from the compiled list should have led to the criminal's capture, but the investigation was treading water. Several people caught the detectives' attention, but background checks didn't lead to any charges because there wasn't enough evidence against them. It seemed things couldn't get any worse, but on August 4, 1989, another body was found on a road near the outskirts of a different town in that same part of Sweden. It was identified as Jannica Ekblad, who was well known to the police. She was known as a 26-year-old woman who had suffered for many years from a substance abuse addiction. She lived in the neighboring city of Malmö. It was also known that Jannica provided sexual services for money to buy her next fix. Despite the traditionally cold attitude of law enforcement toward people in such lines of work, a second death in just a few months was alarming. The investigation revealed that on August 3, a few days before the body was found, Jannica was seen with a friend at a nightclub. The girl spent the evening with this young man, after which she went home, showered and left, telling her grandmother she was heading out to meet a client. She did not hide her activities from her family, even though they did not support her. When detectives first saw Jannica's body, they noted head injuries that looked like signs of a beating. He was unclothed, and the cause of death was strangulation. Shortly before her death, the girl had engaged in sexual activity, but this did not raise much suspicion, given her line of work. Samples were collected, but there was too little material to conclude anything concrete. The distance between the towns where Helene and Jannica lived was approximately 50 kilometers. Despite the strong similarities between the two cases, they were investigated independently by the police in each town. It was believed that a person inclined to attack 10-year-old girls would not do anything similar to 26-year-old women. In any case, they never managed to link the two murders through physical evidence or witness statements. The detectives' work continued, and in October 1989, a glimmer of hope appeared. Several months after the girl's murder, an anonymous letter arrived at the police station. The text was not handwritten, but was composed of letters and words cut out from newspapers. In it, an unknown person identified himself as Helene's killer. He claimed he did it because he felt hatred toward all women due to a difficult childhood and abuse he suffered from his parents. After this letter, all contact with law enforcement ceased. In 1991, the investigator leading the case received a call at his home. On the other end of the line was a man who claimed that he was the one who killed Helene and that the police would never be able to find him. He mocked the detectives, claiming he had destroyed all evidence so thoroughly that even if caught, nothing could be proven against him. This call was successfully traced. It was made from a phone booth located near the Malmö train station. No. The investigative team was certain that both the letter and the call were the work of one person. Despite all attempts to track down the perpetrator, they were unsuccessful. He never made contact again, and the technology of the early 90s simply did not allow for him to be tracked. They were only able to determine the perpetrator's blood type, which was quite rare. The investigation then stalled until 1998. Regardless, the investigation continued all those years under the same team of detectives. Unfortunately, repeat checks also failed to lead to the perpetrator. The situation only changed in 2002 at a private dinner organized for police officers and related services. It was attended by investigators from the detective team who were still trying to solve the mystery of Helene's death. By coincidence, a woman was present who might have known who was involved in the schoolgirl's murder. She recalled a strange young man she had worked with during the period when the murders were committed. The woman supervised and helped rehabilitate troubled individuals who had already run-ins with the law, including for serious crimes. She remembered a man from a dysfunctional family who lived in the town of Horby in 1989. His name was Ulf Olsson. He was a known alcoholic, a very secretive person who suffered from parental abuse and had appeared in several incidents involving harassment. Interestingly, he was equally interested in both minors and older girls. Despite this interesting information, in 2002, the detectives did not attach much importance to Ulf. At that time, they were checking two cousins, who seemed like a more fitting option. The story from the private party was simply added to the other files containing information on the Helene case. As for the brothers, one of them lived close to the home of the deceased schoolgirl, Anton. Local residents had complained about both of them as they would make inappropriate suggestions to girls, including minors. When the police began interviewing acquaintances of suspicious men, many remembered the teenage brothers who showed an unhealthy interest in minors and regularly appeared in city crime reports. An investigation showed they may have assaulted at least 9 children, and those were only the officially recorded cases. The true scale could have been many times more serious. Neither could provide a convincing alibi when speaking with detectives. Their stories about the events of the evening when Helene disappeared were far too different. The young men were detained, and both spent nearly 2 months in prison before DNA analysis proved that neither of them was involved in the girl's murder. In April 2004, a new wave of interest in the case emerged. This time, the impetus was the emergence of new forensic techniques and an agreement with a laboratory in the UK which consented to re-examine archived samples and create a DNA profile. First and foremost, the old list, which included several dozen suspects, was refined. All of these men were persuaded to voluntarily provide DNA samples for forensic analysis. One of the investigators working on the case recalled a story heard during a party. He insisted that Ulf Olsson be added to the list and investigated. In total, 29 names were collected. Everyone voluntarily provided samples for testing. The man the police had accidentally learned about was number 27 on this list. After the samples were collected, it took quite some time for the analyses, even with more advanced technologies. Finally, on June 23, 2004, the results came in. Out of nearly 30 samples, only one showed a match of Olsson. The rare blood type also matched. At that moment, the man had already turned 52. As soon as the lab results were received, the police immediately arrested the suspected killer. At the time of the arrest, the man was drunk, but he did not resist. While at the station, he denied everything. Despite the fact that 15 years had passed since the murder, some of Ulf's old belongings remained. Detectives found his home, not in Horby, but in Malmö, inside which they managed to find traces of old blood. Testing showed that the blood belonged to Janica. This meant the killer was directly linked to two unsolved cases at once. The wife whom Ulf lived with 15 years before the arrest was willing to cooperate and told police that during their relationship he always acted very suspiciously. The man often left the house at night but would not say exactly where he was going. The same thing happened on March 20, 1989. Ulf quickly got ready and left, stating he would sleep in the shed. He forbade his wife from approaching him. The next morning, Ulf returned very tired, but he refused to provide an explanation of what had happened. Ulf Olsen was born on December 19, 1951. He moved to Hörby with his family when he was 4 years old. He grew up in a working-class family that included 4 other children besides him. The Olsen family was described as withdrawn and very unpopular. Ulf's mother even forbade her children from socializing with other kids or bringing them over as guests. Later, Ulf himself as well as his brothers recounted that they were always subjected to abuse by their mother, but her behavior paled in comparison to their father's aggression. Other residents of the town knew little about this because all instances of domestic violence took place behind closed doors. Those who were closer to the family members believed that Ulf was always subjected to the greatest displays of cruelty from his parents. At preschool age, the children in this family might not get food if they were late for dinner. Sometimes they even stayed the night outside if they stayed out too late. Moreover, the boy was seen on the doorstep by the house entrance more often than the other Olsen children. He was punished more often than the others. In his teenage years, the young man began running away from home. At the age of 16, the boy was diagnosed with severe depression. He was in such a depressed state that he was even hospitalized for forced treatment. Ulf told doctors that he was depressed because he was being bullied at school, but there were suspicions that it all had to do with his troubled family. After finishing his education, he got a job on a ship that sailed between Brazil and Japan. He was away from Sweden for quite a long time and only returned in '76. By February of '77, he had completed tool-making courses and met a girl with whom he settled near Helen's house. He lived here until the murders of '89. After a few years of dating, the couple got married, but the marriage was short-lived. The thing is, Ulf always strove for total control over his girlfriend at any cost. When she tried to leave him, tired of his constant nagging and cruelty, the killer even beat her kitten to death. Despite this, his wife did not report him to the police. More than anything, she just wanted to end it all. She was afraid of him. Gradually, the woman managed to resolve their differences, after which the relationship ended. After that, Ulf had several more relationships with women, but they were all fleeting and ended at the women's initiative. Everyone the police managed to speak with pointed to the cruel behavior and total control that the man imposed. The situation only worsened when he started drinking. In the mid-'80s, Ulf even attacked a colleague with a knife. The man's second marriage lasted a little over a year. During this period, he moved to Malmö to be with this woman. Ulf returned to Hörby in 1987. The suspect owned a small house and several outbuildings, which were located about a kilometer from Helen's home. It was dilapidated property, most of which no longer existed by the 2000s. While analyzing Ulf's old holdings, police found that there was a shed here where, according to his third wife, her husband often went. He even slept there, but stubbornly refused to give any explanation. What bothered the woman most was the prohibition, as her husband strictly forbade her from approaching the shed. Detectives believed that this was where he might have held Helen and then Janica captive. The only problem was that shortly after the crimes, Ulf sold the house along with all the outbuildings. There was nothing left to check because the new owners had demolished both structures. The suspected killer's next relationship ended in February of '91, once again, at the wife's initiative because, as she told the police, life in marriage with Ulf had become terrible and frightening. From that moment on, he became the town drunk, rarely seen sober and always accompanied by his dog. During this same period, he had several conflicts with government agencies. Specifically, he tried to gain custody of the child he shared with his ex-wife. The woman actively stood in his way. Ulf managed to win the right to see his child every 14 days, but he simply never showed up. After that, Ulf was convicted of vandalism for constantly scattering screws on the road. In total, he ruined over 200 car tires this way. When investigators searched the rented apartment Ulf had used in recent years, they found the walls covered in drawings. There were no confessions or names, but one image resembled a young woman with bound legs. Her body position was very similar to Jannika's. Another drawing depicted a small girl who was also tied up. In the investigator's opinion, this was Helen. Ulf's work schedule in March and August of '89 during the two murders matched the times of both victims' tweet disappearances. On those days, he took time off and drove his car to the areas where the bodies were later found. Anonymous phone calls made to the police in 1989 were subjected to forensic examination. Modern technology confirmed that the caller's voice most likely belonged to Ulf. Despite the compelling evidence against him, Ulf himself continued to deny any guilt. Even the hypnosis he was subjected to did not help make him talk. However, there was more than enough evidence against him to press charges. The Helen case became the first crime of this scale in Sweden to be solved using DNA technology. The trial against Ulf began in November 2004. The man was charged with kidnapping, raping, premeditated murder, eosi. His lawyer tried to get his sentence reduced from life imprisonment to compulsory psychiatric treatment. The defense attorney was certain his client suffered from severe mental disorders, but the official report stated otherwise. He was found to be of sound mind. The jury concluded he was guilty on all counts, so Ulf was sentenced to life in prison. Then followed a similar trial for the murder of Jannica. As a result, Ulf was also found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The lawyer continued to push the theory of mental illness and filed an appeal, during which it was discovered that Ulf did indeed suffer from a complex set of severe mental disorders. Instead of life in prison, he was sent to a psychiatric clinic for mandatory treatment. It is notable that the convict himself never admitted his guilt. On the contrary, he continued to resist. To prove his innocence, in 2006, Ulf even published a book co-authored with his cousin, attempting to refute the official findings and describe the horrors of the life he had faced. However, Ulf's guilt was not in doubt for the police due to compelling evidence in the form of DNA samples. On the contrary, it was believed that he could have committed other crimes. For example, in 1997, the disappearance of 6-year-old Jasmina occurred in this area, which was similar to the Helen case. However, it was not possible to find convincing evidence of Ulf's involvement in this case. The man continued his attempts to prove his innocence, and in 2010, Ulf even reached out to members of Helen's family to convince them he was right. However, even after speaking with the killer, the Nilssons remained convinced that it was he who had murdered the girl. This man's story ended early on the morning of January 10, 2010, when staff at the psychiatric clinic where he was being treated found him dead in his room. Ulf left behind a letter in which he continued to claim that he was innocent and had decided to take his own life because he considered it far better than spending the rest of his days in that clinic or prison as a living corpse. For the families of Helene and Janica, this victory of forensic science did not bring their daughters back. For the small town where time was forever divided in two before and after, the lost sense of security could no longer be restored. Ulf Olsson took his darkest secrets to the grave, leaving behind only scars on the body of an entire nation and the terrifying realization that evil can live on the next street for years, say hello when you meet, and never reveal its presence. Do you think it is possible to truly move on and let go of such a tragedy, even if the killer got what he deserved? Or do such criminal cases leave an indelible mark on society forever? If you liked my work, subscribe to the channel and support this video with a like. Let's discuss this story in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to my Telegram channel, where I post interesting criminal news daily. The link will be in the video description. Thank you all, and goodbye.